My name's John O'Mara. I'm the program director for our MSMI program. Very happy to see everybody who zoomed in and joined us today. Before our guests actually give their talk, let's go ahead and introduce them now so everybody doesn't have to remain mute. I'd like to introduce Professor Bavia Mullen. Bavia is in our Department of Marketing, teaches both undergrad and graduate courses, and today is going to be sharing some of her work and chatting with you. And real quickly, Bavia, you want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, guys. It's great to meet everyone. I know everyone's kind of scattered around the globe, so it's nice to all come together. So as John mentioned, I'm on the marketing faculty at USF. So this is my 5th year as a faculty member, teach a range of classes, but in the MSMI program specifically, I currently teach experimental design.
Cool. And then also want to introduce Professor Ryan Langan, who's actually either just come from class or I know he has several classes. Ryan, you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. So nice to meet you. Thank you very much for taking time to be here today. So yeah, I'm an assistant professor. I've also been at USF for 5 years, and I teach, undergraduate, I teach principles of marketing and digital marketing. I teach marketing management in our MBA and digital marketing in our MSMI program. And not surprisingly, that will be the theme for my topic today, which is digital marketing. So pleasure to meet you all.
Okay, cool. Well, how about this for just a moment, just to get started, I'm going to mute everybody's mic momentarily, just as we get started. Today, let's say it's 5:35. We're going to kick off now. We planned a program that's going to last approximately 60 minutes. So we plan to wrap up by 6:30. I know everybody has a unique schedule, but if you're able to stay with us till the end, we would greatly value that. And also, after our 2 guest speakers finish their presentation, I want to share with everybody online an update to the reopening of our school in fall or this coming August that I have a feeling will be of interest to a lot of people. So with that as just a little bit of preamble, let's get into it. Today we are fortunate to have, sorry, I'm speaking and admitting all at the same time. Today, we're fortunate to have 2 guests with us, both professors in our MSMI program, Professor Bavia Mullen, Professor Ryan Langan. I'm going to introduce each one sequentially. They're going to give a talk, and then they're going to open the floor to questions. And I hope you will take advantage of asking them any questions you have, either about their talk or the MSMI program overall. After we're finished with both speakers, I'm going to come back on and give you an update on our school and our program for this coming August, and then we'll wrap up. And our goal is to get everybody out of here at 6:30 sharp. Does that work for everybody? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Okay, then without further ado, Professor Bavia Mullen is going to share some of her research, both her technique in terms of using experimental design and also on topic matters dealing, I think, primarily with things like transparency and equity. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, Forbes, Fortune, HBR, and the Wall Street Journal. We're very fortunate to have her with us this evening. Bavia, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Is everyone able to see the slides? Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. So as I said, it's so wonderful to meet everyone. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my research, which kind of ties in very closely with the course I teach as a part of MSMI. And specifically, I'm going to share a paper. This was recently published in an academic journal called Marketing Science. It's freely available, so if you're curious to learn more, to dig into any of this, I'm happy to share where you can get all of the methodological details of this paper, but it basically looks at the benefits of cost transparency. So what happens when firms reveal things like their costs and their profit margins directly to their customers? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research context and what inspired me to do this work. And then I'm going to talk about some of the experimental results from a series of experiments that we ran in order to test this question. And just to give them credit as well, my two co-authors who helped conduct a lot of this research are Ryan Buell and Leslie John, who are both currently professors at Harvard Business School. All right, so just to give you some background as to kind of how we came up with this idea and how we decided to dig into it. So this project was inspired by a local Bay Area retailer, and they sell pretty basic looking clothing. So here's an example of a t-shirt that they sell for $15. But what's really fascinating is that they proclaim on their website, know your costs. We believe customers have the right to know what their products cost to make. And for a number of the items that they sell, they break down not only the different components of the item, but the specific costs associated with each of those components. So for instance, they reveal that the cotton that went into producing this $15 t-shirt cost the firm $2.75. And as we looked around, we started finding other examples of this as well. So here's an infographic that's featured on a website called Buffer, their service. It's not a tangible product. And what they basically offer is social media management services. And they actually reveal the cost breakdown of what it costs them to provide a service that they then charge $10 for their customers. So we were really fascinated by this research question, and this, because the costs associated with producing a good or service are typically really tightly guarded secrets, right? This type of information is usually never revealed to customers. And so we wanted to better understand when and why might cost transparency actually be an effective strategy. Now, the first step that we do, and we talk about this in my classes, before you go down the path of conducting primary research, you first want to see what's already out there, right? Has someone else answered my question? So we went ahead and we did this huge audit of newspaper articles, academic articles, kind of what had previously been done. And we found some related work. So there's some research that looks at the benefit of breaking down prices into smaller components and how that can lead to a price seeming lower. There's also a kind of a wide body of research looking at questions around price fairness. So Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, Daniel Kahneman was actually the first psychologist to win the Nobel Prize in economics. And it's kind of fascinating that he was really interested in marketing questions. So they did a whole bunch of research looking at issues around price fairness. And they found that, if you tell consumers that a firm's costs are increasing, then they're more okay with the firm increasing their price, right? They think that that price increase is more fair. But there is no research that actually advocated this type of proactive disclosure of variable costs to customers. So we decided, okay, now that we know this question already hasn't been answered, let's see if we can answer it. And the way we decided to do that was first to set up a conceptual framework. So this basically allowed us to develop a number of hypotheses around this research that we could then test using a series of experiments. So we decided to conceptualize cost transparency as a form of intimate disclosure between a firm and a customer. And what I mean by that is that there's a whole bunch of literature in social psychology that suggests that in the context of interpersonal relationships, for example, in the context of romantic relationships, those that disclose intimate information about themselves are seen as more trustworthy, they're seen as more likable. So we predicted that in the same way that humans in the context of interpersonal relationships can seem more trustworthy by disclosing intimate information about themselves, maybe a similar mechanism is at play in the context of cost transparency. And if a firm discloses this type of information, people will think of that firm as being more trustworthy. And there's a lot of marketing literature that suggests that, if you have more trust in the business, then you're going to be more likely to purchase from them. And we predicted that this effect would hold even after controlling for perceptions of price fairness. So disclosing costs isn't all about just saying that your price is fair. There's something about just that act of voluntary disclosure that makes it really appealing to customers. So I'm going to go ahead and talk just high level about some of the experimental results. Now, for this paper and across the course of this research study, we ran a ton of experiments. There are 7 in the paper. If you're curious to learn more, I'm happy to share that link. Many more in the supplemental materials. And we used a range of different techniques. So I'm going to show you a couple experiments that use kind of 2 different types of experimental design to help researchers answer these types of questions. So I'm going to talk about some evidence from a natural experiment, and I'll explain a little bit about what I mean by that. And then I'm going to talk about some evidence that we got from a field experiment. So first I'm going to talk about the natural experiment that we ran. So around the time that we were thinking about this research project, we were looking at that website of that firm that I mentioned earlier, right? The one that sells the t-shirts for $15. Some of you might recognize this firm. I can't say what their name is due to an NDA. So that's why I always kind of broadly refer to it as the firm. And so they launched 5 wallets. They were all identical except for the color. They're 5 different colors in December. And then we noticed that in January, they decided to add this transparent pricing infographic to the wallet pages. And this transparent pricing infographic broke down not only the different components of the wallet, but also the costs associated with each of those components. And then there was an additional part of this infographic that disclosed that this firm's markup was lower than that of their competitors. And what was really weird was that this infographic was only there for 3 of the wallet colors and not for the other 2. And we didn't know what was going on. So I ended up reaching out to the company and talking to their marketing team. And it turns out that they had made a mistake. So what had happened was that at the end of December, they had launched these wallets and there was no transparency on any of the pages. At the end of January, they decided to fix that and they decided to add an infographic to all of the 5 wallet pages, but the webmaster actually made a mistake. He only put the infographic on for 3 of the wallet colors and not the other 2. And they actually didn't realize that that mistake had happened until we talked to them. So by March, they corrected that mistake and they put that infographic on all 5 of the wallet colors. So this was kind of annoying for them, but this was really exciting for us because this meant that we could analyze the data and treat it as what economists called a natural experiment. And so what that means is that we were able to get some data from the company. So we got sales data for each day from when the wallet was launched all the way through that last day where they put the infographic on all 5 of the wallet colors. So they gave us sales data for each of the wallets by color. And they also gave us some limited web analytics data. So how many people visited each of those wallet pages on each of those days. And since we had some wallets in the treatment condition, so those are the wallets that received a cost transparency infographic, right where you see that line on the timeline. And we had some wallets in the control condition. Those were the colors that did not receive that infographic. We could compare before versus after. How did the sales change for the wallets in the treatment condition compared to the wallets in the control condition? And we analyzed this using a statistical method called the differences in differences approach, which is often used to analyze this type of data when you have this kind of unexpected experiment that happens when some people see a treatment and some people don't. And you want to see kind of how did their behavior change as a result of getting that treatment. And so I know this data is kind of hard to read, so I kind of summarize it here. When we look at kind of average daily sales by color for the wallets in the treatment versus the wallet in the control condition. And what you can see is in the pre-period, they're pretty similar. But in the post-period, the wallets in the treatment condition were far less affected by seasonality than the wallets in the control condition. Now, there was a lot going on here. This was not like a perfectly planned experiment, right? This happened because of a mistake that the company made. But what we were able to do was because we did the statistical analysis, we could control for things like fixed effects, so differences in popularity by wallet color, and for differences in popularity by accounting for how many times people visited the web page using that analytics data for one wallet color versus the other. And so we basically did a gigantic statistical regression analysis. And what we found was even with the most conservative estimates, that analysis showed us that that addition of the cost transparency transparency infographic increased daily sales by at least 22%. So those treatment wallets did 22% better than they would have if they did not have that cost transparency infographic. So this is really interesting, kind of provocative data, but this was far from perfect, right? That's why, economists and market researchers, we really like natural experiments because they can give us a sense of what's happening in the real world, but they're not necessarily clean experiments. So the next thing that we did is we took this to the field, and we wanted to test this in a more kind of controlled context. So for this field experiment, it was actually pretty straightforward. We had two conditions for creating different signs that would accompany a bowl of chicken soup that was being sold at a university cafeteria. So this bowl of chicken soup was being sold for $4.95 for a 16 ounce.
You know what? Take your time. I won't do anything with it. I have two bags.
Sorry, hold on. I'm going to mute.
Oh, I got it. It's all good. I have lots of practice with this from classes. So, so in the control condition, we talked to the people who were running the cafeteria, and they told us, here are all the components of a bowl of chicken noodle soup. Now, in the cost transparency condition, the cafeteria management told us what the actual costs were for each of those components. So we knew the cost of the labor, the chicken breast and the broth, the carrots, etc. And so we revealed that the total cost was about $4, and so they were making about a 20% profit margin. So the way we did this is we pre-registered the study. This is a method that researchers sometimes do to state what their hypothesis is before they run the experiment, to really make sure that you're not digging around in the data for results. So we pre-registered the study, and we ran it over a 5-week period in the university cafeteria during lunch. And we'd have one sign up from 11:30 to 12:30, and then we'd have one sign up from 12:35 to 1:35, and we switched around the order of which sign was up when. So sometimes the cost transparency sign would be up in the earlier time period, sometimes the control sign would be up in the earlier time period. And so over the course of 5 weeks, we were able to have over 9,000 transactions from 50 hours of lunch sales. And so this gave us a ton of data. And what was really, really cool is that for every order that we had from a customer, we actually had a variable that would indicate whether or not someone bought a bowl of chicken noodle soup. So we were able to see, hey, if they put their order in at the time when the transparent sign up was up versus when the control sign was up, if we compare those, is there an increased probability of purchase during one versus the other? And what we found was when we had that cost transparent sign up, this significantly increased the probability of a chicken noodle soup bowl purchase by about 20%. So again, this is another thing that we cover in my classes, right? When you have a difference between actions across two conditions, how do you actually know if you can believe this data, right? Was this generated by random chance, or is this difference actually statistically significant? And so we ran a bunch of statistical tests, in this case, something called a logistic regression, to help see, is that difference statistically significant? And indeed it was. So yet again, we had more evidence for our hypothesis that cost transparency can increase sales. Now, the next step to better understand this research question was to dig into the psychological mechanism that was driving the effect. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into these studies again. I'm happy to share this if you're curious to dig in and learn more about how these studies were run. But we ran a bunch of studies basically using hypothetical scenarios with an online panel. This is something that we do in my classes, right? We actually kind of mock up experiments. And even if we can't go set up signs in the cafeteria, there are ways for us to still run these experiments online. So we can test things like 2 different versions of a product or 2 different versions of a website. We can pre-test that in the lab to get some initial findings before actually making a decision going forward. So we ran a whole bunch of studies, and we basically kept replicating our effect over and over again. We replicated it across different product categories. We replicated it across different profit margins. We replicated it for products versus services. And we were also able to show, kind of, because we could measure all types of kind of feelings about the product or the service, how people felt when the firm was being cost transparent. And what we consistently found was that people really found a firm to be more trustworthy as a function of their willingness to disclose their costs to their consumers. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure I leave time for questions, but that's just a sampling not only of my research, but some of the methods that we really talk about and delve into kind of in the context of an experimental design class.
Thank you very much, Bobby. Actually, that was pretty cool. And I have one question, but I'll hold mine till the very last. Hey, folks, anybody out there? And Bobby, maybe you can unshare your, and if somebody has a particular question, you can jump back on and put your slides back up. And listening to Bavia's short presentation, anybody have any questions about her work or maybe her courses at USF or our MSMI program? Any questions at all?
Happy to answer anything. Or life in general.
I'm sorry, Bobby, if you can't read them, I'll read them.
I see it now.
Yeah, first question was, what was your favorite part of the research process? And by the way, I'm going to add on, and what's the part of the research process that you're least motivated by?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love this question. So favorite part of the process. Okay, so my favorite part, this is maybe like the thrill-seeking part of me. So when you have a hypothesis and you run an experiment and then you're like about to like hit on the code to see like what the results were, it's like you're so excited because you're like, oh my God, like what am I going to learn? Or is it going to be like completely against everything that I hypothesized? And you know, will this completely throw everything that I've thought about the world into disarray? Like, I love that moment. I find it so exciting of just like generating the initial results for the first time to see like, did I discover something new in the world, or have I just confused myself even more because I have inconsistent findings or whatever. So that's definitely my favorite part. And then what was the second part? Oh, the least favorite part. So this is actually, if anyone is like ever interested in like talking about like PhD programs or stuff like that, or what it means to be in academic marketing. So I think my least favorite part is the part that you will most be the least likely to do, is kind of in order, like once we ran all these studies and we had the data, the path to get this published was incredibly long. The academic review process is brutal. It took more than 2 years. We basically go through peer review in the same way that like a cancer researcher would go through peer review, like resubmitting their data and their findings again and again and again, getting feedback, responding to it. It's a really, really intense process and really difficult to kind of get stuff published in academic journals. And sometimes I'm just like, I want this information to be out in the world. I understand why the process exists, but it can still be very frustrating. But most of the time, if you're just working like, you know, doing marketing intelligence for a company, you're not going to spend 2 years trying to go through the peer review process, right? You're going to present your findings to the senior executives. They're going to make a decision, and then life will move on. So, yeah.
One more question, Bavia.
Sure.
From Michelle, can you see that?
Yes. Yeah, so we will be doing similar research in my class. So as I said, this is a 2-year project. Our class lasts for 7 weeks. So we are not going to kind of necessarily do like giant field experiments, but we definitely learn kind of the basics of running experiments. How do we think about designing a hypothesis? We run kind of relatively smaller experiments in the class. It's an important part of the class. So once you have a hypothesis to test an aspect of human behavior, how do we set up an experiment? How do we analyze that data? So we'll definitely do a version of this in the class. We're not going to be doing necessarily a big field experiment, like, you know, manipulating signage in the store out in the world. But we do our own 7-week version of designing and running and then analyzing an experiment. And then in the same way that I'm presenting these results to you, you will eventually present your results back to me. So.
And maybe the last one before we start moving on, at the bottom, they're all kind of related. What kind of tools or software did you use in specifically the last study that you were sharing with us?
Yeah, definitely. So for most of this research work, use some combination of SPSS and R. And honestly, some of the basic analysis can even be done in Excel. So kind of combination of different tools. I usually do a poll at the beginning of my classes to understand like what marketing tools do you want to use to do the analysis? Because I've taught the similar analysis using SPSS, using Jump. If there's demand for R, I'm open to doing that. So I think a variety of different tools can be used to run this type of analysis. The default in the past, when I've kind of taught variations of this analysis, has been SPSS, but this is something that's a work in progress, right? I think as we look at industry demands, as different tools are kind of being used in the broader world, I've kind of taught this analysis using different statistical programs. The default has been SPSS. Potentially, would be teaching and using other languages in the future as well. Most likely not Python. Social scientists don't use Python as much, but R is definitely used pretty predominantly in the field as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that real quickly if I can. In addition to SPSS, I think depending on which courses you're taking in our program, you may also be exposed. I know some of our professors prefer Jump. But this isn't a big data analytics degree. And I'll talk more about that at the end if it's relevant questions. But one thing I did want to reinforce, and to one of the questions on the chat box and also what Bavia mentioned, is you're going to have an opportunity to learn these tools and apply them in your coursework. But then also keep in mind, the MSMI program is just under a year long. The last 3 months of your program, you're actually going to be, if you decide to come to USF, you'll actually be divided up into teams, and each team is actually going to be working with a local corporate partner. And so as Bavia did, you're going to actually meet with your client. They're going to give you a real live business or marketing challenge. And you guys, based on your learning from our program, you and your team, you're going to have to take that business challenge or that question, kind of like when Bobby was surmising what's the effect of cost transparency on purchase. You're going to have to take that business challenge, translate it into a proper research objective, scope the project, design your research, field it, analyze your own results, and then at the end of the practicum, you'll be standing up in front of the executives at the company that you're working for, and you'll share your findings and your recommendations. So I saw in the chat, are we going to be able to do this kind of thing in the program? Some of your analysis may not be quite as sophisticated as Bavia's and her teams. You also have to understand they had quite a bit, not just more experience, but more time than you. But yes, you're very much going to be applying what you're learning, and you're also going to be applying it in a practicum with a corporate partner. Does that make sense to folks? Cool. How about this? I know we could talk continue the conversation with Bavia, and if you have additional questions at the end, we'll return to them. But in the interest of time, if it's okay, what I'd like to do is kind of turn our attention. So I may introduce our second speaker, Professor Ryan Langan. Ryan's research lies in branding, a topic that's near and dear to my heart, as well as corporate social responsibility and corporate philanthropy. His work's been featured in numerous business journals. I believe he's also been author and co-author of at least one book. And Ryan today is going to be talking about the digital skills gap that exists, as well as some of the knowledge and skills that folks like you and myself need to succeed in today's competitive marketplace. So Ryan, maybe that is a little bit of a precursor, and please say as much more as you'd like, but let's turn it over to Professor Ryan Langan.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. Before I jump into things, Bobby, I'm curious to know, did you ever send a thank you note to that webmaster?
I know, right? Thank you for messing up. Bye. No, not so much, but that's okay. Maybe I still should. Thanks, Ryan.
So quickly, I just wanted to have a conversation with you and share some of the research I did that looks at the state of digital marketing in academia. And if you're familiar with digital marketing, either from an academic background or you have a career in digital marketing, I'm sure you're quite familiar with just how profound the effect technology has had on marketing and on business. I mean, it's really completely changed business models. It's changed on a fundamental level the manner in which brands, companies interact with consumers. It's really quite remarkable. And it doesn't take long diving into this topic, and can I just apologize for this lighting? It's absolutely terrible, I'm sorry, but it doesn't take long when you look at this topic to come across a concept that's often referred to as a digital skills gap. Has anyone ever heard of that, this notion of a digital skills gap? Some of you are nodding. So my co-authors and I were interested in understanding to what extent is academia responding to the evolution in marketing practices and processes. More specifically, how much is digital marketing represented in undergraduate marketing curriculum? Is it helping to close that digital skills gap, or is it part of the problem? So I only have a few slides to share with you today, but to address this research question, to better understand what is the state of digital marketing in academia, my co-authors, Scott Cowley and Carlin Nguyen at Western Michigan and Cal State LA respectively, realized that the only way to get a good answer to this question was to essentially scour all 529 AACSB accredited business websites within the US. And that was a rather time-consuming endeavor, but we found some interesting results. This paper was published in the Journal of Marketing Education, and we were very fortunate in 2019 to receive the Paper of the Year award from the Journal of Marketing for the work that we did. And so I'll share a couple of the things that came out of that bit of research. I'll share my screen here. I guess, John, would you mind posing that question to the group in the chat?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Bring it up.
Yep. Can you see? You can see it too, Ryan?
I can see it as well. Yes, absolutely. Cool. So before I bring up the slide, does anyone want to weigh in on what you think the answer is to the percentage of AACSB accredited business schools that currently do not even offer a single standalone digital marketing course in today's era? 43%? 43, Andrew, Tanisha, Crystal are all at 43%. Anyone else want to weigh in before I bring up a slide and answer that question? Okay, Hannes is 27%, Emilio's at 27.
This isn't Ryan, this isn't one of those trick questions where the real answer is 82, is it?
You're all wrong. Congratulations. No, and I wish I had some kind of prize for you to give you, but thankfully, you guys, the answer was not 43%, but still an astounding 27%, a full 27% of AACSB accredited business schools do not offer any. So if you put 27%, you're absolutely correct. These were our findings. The final number of our final sample, I should say, that we considered was 477 schools, because we limited our sample to those accredited business schools with a marketing department, with business schools that require at least one marketing class. So of those 528, only 477 require at least one marketing class. So that was our sample. So there it is. 27% of business schools across the United States do not offer any digital marketing classes. It may be infused or incorporated into some of their legacy classes or existing classes, but it's not a standalone class. For the remaining classes, about half, 49%, only offer one class. So, it's starting to shed some light on, the extent to which academia is playing a role in the digital skills gap. The other thing that we noted when we looked through all of these classes was, is there a consensus among which classes are being offered? And it turns out there's not. There's actually 229 different types of digital marketing classes being offered. I mean, the names were all over the place in terms of what what's being offered. Does anyone want to weigh in and venture a guess as to what you think some of the more common digital marketing classes might be offered at universities, or what's one that you may have taken? Has anyone taken a digital marketing related type of course?
Holy cow, you're gonna have a lot of students, Ryan.
Oh, it's in the, so 1 second here. I'm not even looking at the chat here, but okay, oh, good. E-marketing, nice. Marketing analytics, absolutely. Marketing in digital world, yes. Good, that will be a wonderful foundation. I'm sure you found the digital marketing, yeah, just a general digital marketing class, absolutely. Well, some of you are right in that social media analytics. Yes, Michelle. Mm-hmm. Okay. And, oh, Google, well, that's very specific, Rahini. Did you do that as a certification or an actual class? My guess would be, the certification, but that would be a very specific class. Social media, business technology, broadly interesting. Well, thank you all for sharing. Here's what we pulled from that. Of those 229 different classes, these were some of the most common, and it maps onto what you were just talking about. Social media marketing, digital marketing were two of the most prevalent, followed by marketing analytics, internet marketing, and electronic e-marketing as well. And one of these recommendations that we had in this paper was for academics, academic institutions to revisit the type of offerings. Given that there's 229 different kinds, are you indeed meeting the needs of, are you giving a good foundation? Are you meeting the needs of the workplace, right? So if you're calling your class e-marketing, if you do a Google trend search between e-marketing or electronic marketing and digital marketing, you can see that the prevalency of the use of digital marketing surpassed e-marketing all the way back in 2013. So it's much more common to refer to as digital marketing now. Search and content marketing, absolutely. I'm sure that was a worthwhile class. And so given that there are very few classes being offered in general, right? 27% not offering any, and about half of the remaining ones only offering one class. It's also not surprising that universities at the undergraduate level aren't offering, specific majors in digital marketing. For digital marketing or analytics or social media, e-commerce. Very few minors, very few concentrations, certifications, specializations. So this is something that also speaks to the extent to which academia is, kind of leading to that digital marketing skills gap. And near the end of the paper, we did a simple regression analysis. We looked at what are some of the factors that might predict the degree to which any university is offering digital marketing classes. We looked at a few variables like geographic location, Northeast, Southeast, Southwest, Northwest. Surprisingly, we found no significant difference, irrespective of what region you're in. That doesn't vary. What else did we look at? The Carnegie classification, if it's just an undergraduate degree, master's or PhD granting, no significant difference there, which also I thought was a little bit surprising. The only significant difference we found was one, if digital marketing was required, then they offered more digital marketing classes. That's really not surprising at all. But when it's a little less intuitive was private universities offer significantly more digital marketing courses relative to public. Granted, it was significant, but the effect size was rather small. But there was a notable difference between private universities offering digital marketing relative to public. We didn't have a good explanation for that. That wasn't the focus of this particular study, but we reasoned that perhaps given the fact that we have smaller class sizes at private universities, it allowed for a greater number of preps. That could be way off. Let's see, do I have any other slides to share with you? No, that I do not. This was the final framework that we put together. We noted that as we looked at all 477 institutions, there was a pretty good range with respect to how institutions are incorporating digital marketing into their curriculum. From those that have no offerings, but they may or may not be offering in, say, their principles of marketing class or their marketing research. Some are offering one or more electives. The range was from 0 to 9. And I think Cal State LA, and I want to say maybe University of Denver, but I could be wrong on the Denver one. We're on the higher end, up to 9 electives being offered. Further incorporating digital marketing into curriculum, institutions had the opportunity to either specialize, offer it as a major, minor certification emphasis, or make it an actual required class. And finally, we proposed in our model to say how can academic institutions move along this continuum and do a better job of incorporating digital marketing. We suggested that they could reach this exemplification stage, which I think there was only around 4 or 5 universities nationwide that reached this particular stage that had digital marketing both as a required class and offered specialization. So those were the primary takeaways from the study. I'll open it up to any questions you have about this particular research study. It was all secondary data based on websites, or what we're covering in my digital marketing class, or any questions at all.
Hey, Ryan, just to get us started, maybe could you just share with all of us, just real top level, what are some of the key components or topics that you cover in the area of digital marketing for our MSMI program?
We start off the semester by providing an overview of digital marketing, just getting people up to speed on, what are the assets, what is the inventory associated with digital marketing. We provide a couple of frameworks for you if you were going to either work for an organization or if you went into consulting, for example, and you wanted to assess a company's online presence. We offer a couple start off with a couple frameworks. From there, the course moves into content marketing, which is what we covered today. And we look at, the different types of content, how it's created. We have the class create content calendars. We use SEMrush to optimize content on a particular article. From there, we're going to move to websites and look at, how they're designed, information architecture, navigation, the overall user experience. Metrics, we'll be doing a Google Analytics exercise next week, providing a framework for that. And then from there, we'll move into SEO, on-page, off-page SEO, and looking at social media marketing from a strategic perspective, influencer marketing. And those are some of the primary topics we're covering. Email marketing, conversion rate optimization. These things are all just coming to me now.
It's a lot. I know you're in the midst of teaching it. So over to the group. Any questions at all for Ryan, either about the work that he shared with you or about his coursework in the MSMI program?
Not in the chat window, please. Just lay it on me. No, you can use the chat. That's fine. I think I scared him away with that.
Well, I have one question, but it's not for Ryan. It's actually for all you folks. I'm just curious, as you look at your own future careers, how many of you see yourself having a career in, well, I'll say in the digital marketing space? That could be social media marketing, doing research online, e-commerce. How many just in the chat box? Either put a yes or what you hope to be doing in your near future career. I'm just curious how prevalent. Tanisha, yes. Okay. Anybody else? And by the way, if not, that's totally cool. That's not my realm. So if you're not a digital geek, sorry, Ryan, that's totally fine also. Okay, a whole bunch of yeses. Okay, it's fantastic. If you have any specific questions for Ryan, please interrupt. When I say interrupt, please open your mic and ask them. Ryan, would it be okay if I shared the screen for a moment and maybe just as long as I have Bavia and you with me, I'd like to just share with the respondents a quick overview of our curriculum and talk about our program for the coming fall. Does that be okay?
I have a little one in the background, so I muted myself. Can I answer Dara's question real quickly before you jump into that?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry if I missed something, please.
Yeah. What is one thing that they would want to know about marketing tech, it would be very difficult to narrow it down, as you probably well know. It really depends on what area you want to go with your career. I mean, you could specialize just in email marketing, right? Marketing automation. But I would say if you want to have an understanding of, a general understanding, for me, it would be about understanding how to create compelling content and execute that from a strategic perspective. You may have heard content is the currency of the internet. It influences your website, it influences your email, it influences your paid. It factors into everything. So how can you create compelling content? And the other thing I would say, understand e-commerce, digital marketing, and social media marketing from a strategic perspective. Understand how to, how to develop frameworks for looking at the marketing analytics and choosing KPIs. That'd be my thoughts on that.
Milan, I see your question. I'm going to address it in just a moment. And before I transition a little bit, any other questions for Ryan before we jump into our last topic for the day? Okay, so Malin Day asks, is there a capstone project? And yes, there is. And so I just want to weigh in. If you'll give me just a little bit, a couple of minutes, I would like to share with you and weigh in on just maybe 3 or 4 key points on our program and this upcoming fall, which I'm assuming might be the class that you all are interested in joining. So I'm going to make a few points. And again, if you have a question, don't hesitate to interrupt me, and or Ryan or Bavia, if I miss a chat while I'm speaking, please clue me in. So the first thing I want to share, just at a real top line level, is you've heard Bobby and Ryan talk a little bit about our program. In one slide, this is the MSMI program. And I just want to make a couple of key points. The first thing is up here, right? So this is a master's 100% devoted to marketing. It's 15 marketing courses. You're going to do a real deep dive, specifically in the areas of marketing research, marketing analytics, and then obviously learning how to communicate your findings. The program is set up in 5 sequential modules. At USF, someone help me out here. Anybody online, when you went to your undergrad, how many of you were semester? Anybody go to undergrad on a semester system? Okay, now anybody on a quarter system? And sorry, I can't see everybody. Okay, new message. So at USF, at the graduate level, we do something a little bit different. Our undergraduate program is on a semester, but at USF, for the graduate, we take a semester, which is 16 weeks, and we cut it in half. So we're on something we call modules, 8-week modules, and it allows us and allows our students to actually be exposed to more and different course content in a short period of time. So your MSMI program is actually made up of 5 modules, right? 2 in the fall semester. So foundational coursework, then you're going to quickly start to progress statistics, qualitative research, survey design, storytelling with data, a very important class. In spring, your coursework will advance again. You're going to get into experimental design. As a matter of fact, Bavia chatted at length about that. Digital marketing with Ryan Langan, marketing analytics, marketing strategy. And then to answer the question that was posed to me a moment ago, is there a capstone course? Yes. So your capstone, you are receiving a master's degree. So think of your thesis as your practicum. And as I mentioned before, it's a 3-month, 2 successive courses, but really a 3-month live research project where you'll be positioned with an external company working on a live marketing business challenge of some sort. And at the end of this practicum, so in the summer, so 11 months later, after you start the program, at the end of the practicum, if you didn't hear me before, you and your team, after conducting your research, fielding your research, you'll analyze results, and then you'll actually stand up in front of not just your professors, but the executives at the company that you're placed in, and you'll share your research findings and your strategic recommendations. So pretty cool opportunity. I said I wanted to, by the way, did I answer the question? And if you have a follow-up, please open your microphone and just let me know. I mentioned I wanted to make 2 or 3 points. So this is the first big point I wanted to share with you. So right now, USF plans to return to in-person in starting August 21. Like most universities, we're online at the moment. The picture behind me is our downtown graduate school. You'll see it's surrounded by a lot of big, tall glass buildings. That's because we're centered right in the middle of downtown San Francisco. And we're surrounded literally by all those companies you've heard of, right? So within 1 or 2 blocks, and I'm not exaggerating, is LinkedIn, is Adobe, is Autodesk, is Salesforce, Oracle. The list is quite impressive. And these are the kinds of companies you'll be working with. Let's see if I can. I'm going to do this kind of quickly because I want to be sensitive to your time. I just want to reiterate a couple of points. I know everybody here has hopefully researched our program and you know it's STEM certified. And so what that means in English is you're going to be learning an entire marketing research toolkit, right? Both qualitative and quantitative tools, skills, and concepts that you'll be able to apply. Also, as a result of that, if you happen to be an international student, you'll qualify for up to 3 years of OPT, which is a substantial leg up in the US job market upon graduation. The 2 points that sometimes don't get enough press that I really wanted to reinforce is why USF? And 2 reasons. The first is high touch. And what I mean by that is you have an amazing ability, if you come to USF, to really get to know your professors, interact with your professors and your peers. I know you've heard of teacher-student or student-teacher ratios. In our MSMI program, get this, we have 15 courses, we have 11 professors. It's a little less than 2 students per professor. So when I say high touch, I mean that in the real sense of the term. It's also very hands-on. Our program, obviously, you're going to be earning a master's degree. So obviously there's going to be academic rigor, but for not just the practicum, for every single professor's course, you're going to be learning and you're going to be applying what you learn in class. I'm not going to bore you. These are examples of positions that if you do a great job will be available to you in the Bay Area and further around. And I just want to make 2 last points, and then I promise to stop. The application to our program, I think, is rather streamlined. And when I say it's easy, I don't mean that the program's easy, but we don't want to have the application process bogging anybody down. So this is what's required. And I'll tell you right now, since I'm one of the people that will be reviewing your applications, we really put a lot of emphasis on this statement of purpose. And in the outline application, we ask you to address 3 specific questions. So if you're thinking of applying to us, I definitely recommend that you look at that statement of purpose and please take that outline to heart. As a matter of fact, Ryan Langan is joining me currently as we interview candidates for Fall 21. And then finally, this is my last point. For those that are interested, USF operates on what we call a rolling application or acceptance calendar. So we don't get all the applications and then wait until June or July and pick the students, and then that's our August class. We're actually admitting students as we go, and then once we're filled, we're filled. So we're fortunate. We've gone through 2 rounds of applications and acceptances already. The next one, we're sitting here talking in early February, just so you know, the next period of reviewing applications and accepting candidates will close on March 16th. So that's a long way of saying, if you are interested in our program, we hope you are. Excuse me, there is one last thing I wanted to share. if you are interested in our program, please do submit your application. And we would love to hear from you. And I said I would be quick. This is the last slide. And in case anybody has any questions today that either you don't want to ask or you think of afterwards, please take note of my email address. And anybody online is welcome. And I'll put that in the chat box in a moment. Anybody who's joined us online today is welcome to reach out and email me. Okay, we promised you that we would finish at 6:30, and hopefully we're pretty good at keeping our promises. So I think it's 6:29, probably 30 seconds. But in any case, before I formally wrap up and thank our presenters, I want to open the microphone to you guys. Any questions at all, either to our professors who teach in our program, as do I, or about our program in general, anything at all before we start to wrap up. And if you open your mic, it'd be easier for me. Okay. Then I will take silence as consent. So then let me say this. First, I want to thank both of our speakers. So to Ryan and to Bavia, thank you very much. And then I want to thank all of you. I know some of you are zooming in, it's nighttime, it's morning time, and the rest of you, if you're local time, that means you worked all day and then you took your time to be with us. So no matter where your location, we're very impressed that you decided to spend some time with us. Hopefully you got a little sense of our program and not just the content, but hopefully, just through listening to Bavia, Ryan, and even myself, you got a little sense of what the professors are like, what the vibe is like here at USF. Before we wrap up, I want to share something that I think you'll find interesting. If you're really intrigued by our program, I'm going to be hosting a follow-up webinar 1 month from today. And I'm going to ask my peer, Dory, in a moment. But I believe if you join us today, you'll get an automatic invite. And we're going to have a follow-up webinar, but not with any professors, with students in the current program. And we thought, wouldn't it be cool for us to just have a Q&A session where you get to ask all those questions that you're always dying to ask, like, hey, what's the program really like? Are the professors a pain in the butt? Is it really good? Did you learn anything? All that kind of stuff, right? That's important, and we understand that. So with that, we're done. Ryan, Bavia, thank you very much. Everybody who zoomed in today, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. And don't hesitate to reach out if we can be of help, okay? Take care, everybody.